Thank you. I am Kerry. I am with Bailey Nurseries. And just for a small amount of background, Bailey Nurseries is about 120 years old. It's a family-run nursery grower. We specialize in a very wide variety of plant material. Basically, you name it, we grow it. And we do have a very strong focus on breeding programs. And out of our breeding programs, we do have 3 brands within our company. Some of them you might be familiar with. If you are familiar with Easy or Endless Summer hydrangeas, the hydrangeas in the blue pot, those are ours. We also have First Editions plants, and then we also do some Easy Elegance roses. So with that being said, personally, I've always loved roses myself. I've loved growing them in my own yard. When I was here, I got to work with roses on this end of it. And now with Bailey Nurseries, I've gotten to see a little bit of a different side. I've been there about 14 years, and within that, so I've gotten to see our production cycles. And the part that really interests me personally is the breeding and the genetics, and kind of seeing how these things have changed over the years, and kind of what it takes to get one of these plants to the market, and really ultimately, why do we want to do it? My main point of the talk today that I want you guys to walk away from with is roses don't have to be difficult. I think a lot of people are intimidated by them. They think they're one of the harder things to grow in your yard. And while that can be true, it's not always necessarily the case. I think a lot of some of these thoughts come from seeing a lot of our moms or grandmas in the yards, kind of fussing over these little, these really hard to care for plants, and basically them being a little bit of a pain. I know personally growing up, I remember my grandma, she had this lovely little row of hybrid tea roses in gravel, and I remember her out there just kind of toiling, messing with them, pruning, cleaning, making sure they had their rose cones and that kind of thing. And I still to this day remember being a kid watching her do this through the seasons and looking at these shrubs that, they just looked kind of sparse. They were great when they flowered, but I remember thinking, that looks like a lot of work and I will never do that. Well, fast forward a few decades and here I am doing those things. Basically though, I want you to know that nowadays there are tons of different types. There are tons of different levels of maintenance. There's all kinds. 15 years ago or so, I loved having some of those higher maintenance types. I enjoyed being out there like my grandma, messing around with them, doing those kinds of things. I think at my peak, I had probably 45 to 50 in my yard, which to some people is not a lot. To me in a small city yard, that was a lot. But then things happen. Life gets busy. I tend to lean a little bit more towards the lower maintenance end of the spectrum when it comes to these things. So I'm really grateful that breeding programs like Easy Elegance and some of these others are out there, allow me to have these roses in my yard without all of the maintenance. So I hope today, whether you guys lean towards the higher end of the maintenance or the lower ends, I hope that I can give you at least a few kind of tips, tricks, and maybe some best practices for all of these types. One thing I will note is that I want you guys to remember, everybody's situation is different. Your yard is not going to be the same as your yard. You're not going to like the same varieties as them. Your soil might be different. So everybody's going to be a little different. So I want you to know kind of your mileage may vary with some of these tips. Not everything is going to work for everybody, but I want you to at least take away maybe a couple things you'll try, a couple of new ideas. And honestly, I think I would say my best overall tip would be to take notes, whether mentally, or actually physically. When you're trying things, take notes on varieties you liked or didn't like. What worked when it came to care, to maintenance, that kind of thing. I'm happy to share with you some of my follies, and I can't tell you how many times taking notes in my own yard has saved me from making the same mistake over and over and over. You'll try something, and then something happens to it, you kind of forget. And I'm like, ooh, I love that, I'm gonna try it again. And then I look back, oh yeah, that didn't quite work for me. So maybe make a little bit of a different choice. So that's always very, very, very helpful. Now, there's a few things to think about when you are picking roses for your own yard. And we're gonna dive a little bit into each one of these sections. And if you guys have any questions at any time, please feel free to interrupt me, or you can come and talk to me after the talk, and I'm happy to answer any questions, okay? So the things that we're going to talk about the different plant types. We're going to talk about basically the main categories of roses, okay? We'll talk about planting sites, fertilization, pruning, winter care, and some disease and pests, okay? Now, when we talk about rose types, I will go into each kind of the different types and classes of them. But the main thing that you really want to know when you're looking for a rose for your yard, you're going to need to know if it's grafted or what we call own root, okay? Now, own root roses are basically exactly what they sound like. The entire plant is one plant itself. It's like your typical shrub or anything that you buy and put in your yard, okay? And this, for example, is that. Now, a grafted shrub, basically what that means is it's literally two different plants. The top part, which is the plant or variety that you desire, that you want to plant, and then a different understock. And they are grafted. They're literally spliced and put together right above the soil line, okay? Now, we do this to increase hardiness on plants. Hybrid teas are one of those types that are a little bit, they're a little bit less hardy. And so by putting them on one of those understocks, it makes it much easier and a much more robust plant and easier to grow in our area, okay? Now, so the way that you can tell if the plant is grafted is you're gonna look right above the soil line on your rose. And if you see kind of just a little knot, or you can really tell that it looks a little bit different, chances are it's grafted. And the reason why it's important for you guys to know this is that if it's a grafted rose, you're gonna have to take care of it a little bit differently and have a little bit different winter protection than if it's not, okay? And in most cases, the tag won't tell you. That's just the way it is. So if you know what you're looking for, you don't have to worry about even reading that, okay? So the first class of roses that we'll talk about are hybrid teas. And these are the ones that pretty much everybody thinks of when you think of the old-fashioned, your grandma's roses, like me, or long stem roses. These are the beautiful shapes with the beautiful colors, great fragrance, and that kind of thing. These are almost all going to be grafted. So if you're buying a hybrid tea, you don't really even have to check it. Chances are it's gonna be grafted, okay? These are the ones that are considered the most high maintenance of the roses, but they really have come a long way, and there's quite a few out now that aren't nearly as persnickety as maybe they were back in the day. Some of these are really popular. You can look at your rose list and see the list of the ones that Trevor's getting in, but you guys might even know some of them by name, by Mr. Lincoln, Barbara Streisand, Double Delight. There's a whole slew of them. And they really are great to grow. And then kind of a subclass of hybrid teas are called floribundas. The flowers on these are a little bit flatter. They're great in the cutting garden. They're fairly easy care. The clusters of flowers on these are usually 3 to 5 flowers each. They have a constant growth cycle, which is kind of nice. And in this category, some are going to be grafted and some are own root in this area, okay? Another little subclass of the hybrid teas are the grandifloras, and we actually get these by crossing hybrid teas with the floribundas. And again, we're gonna have like a 3 to 5 flower cluster with a little bit of a flatter top. They're usually a fairly large plant. You're gonna have some grafted, some not, and these are pretty easy to care for. The next are David Austin's or English roses. If most of you guys are probably familiar with these, I tend to think of these as kind of cottage type roses. These are the ones that are really big. They combine that like rosette shape that have a really high petal count with that old world flower, that lovely fragrance that most people are looking for. Again, some of these are grafted, some of these are not. And within this range, you're gonna find a really wide range of color, size. They're kind of like potato chips. I feel like you cannot have just one of these. I absolutely love that line. When it comes to climbers, does anybody in here grow climbing roses? Okay. So then you guys, as you probably know, most of these are gonna be repeat bloomers. Many of them will bloom on old wood earlier in the season and then on their new wood as it gets a little bit later in the season. There's a wide variety of size and color and also sizes. These usually range from about 8 to up to 20 feet tall. So some of these can get pretty darn monstrous, okay? You can train these basically on anything that'll sit still long enough to let you tie it to it. You can trellis, an arch, obelisks, whatever you have around. The nice thing about these, I think, compared to other vines is, and these aren't true vining plants, but other climbers, I should say, is they're not such strong growers that they're gonna take over. And some of these vines are they're really heavy duty. You can grow something and the next morning you wake up and it's half eaten your house. That's not what you want. If you just have a nice arch, this is a great choice to go on something like that. And then when it comes to the last category that we'll touch on, I'm gonna talk about shrubs or ground cover type roses, okay? Many of these plants tend to be a little bit larger than some of the other rose types, and they also tend to be a lot fuller. And I don't mean, they don't get huge, but I mean, a lot of roses tend to be a little more vase-shaped and smaller at the base, where these actually look more like a shrub, like a true shrub in your yard, okay? Pretty much all of these are going to be own root, so you don't even have to worry about the grafting or anything on any of these, okay? So because of that, they are able to withstand our really cold, harsh winters without much care, which is really nice. And this class of roses is loved for their low maintenance. They have a large variety of colors and sizes. They're really easy to grow. I'm sure you guys have heard of knockout roses or drift roses and those kinds of plants. Those are all shrub roses. And then, like I mentioned, we have our Easy Elegance shrub roses. And I have a few of these up here if anybody wants to grab one afterwards. There's some good rose information in there, but I just really want you guys to be able to see what a wide variety. You can get anything from white to red, bicolors, anything in between in a lot of these shrub roses, which is really nice. I tend to think of shrub roses as kind of the workhorses of the rose world. You can use them as a specimen like the other roses, but you can also replace regular shrubs in your yard. You can make a hedge out of them. You can do pretty much anything that you would with a regular shrub in your yard with the bonus of season-long blooms, okay? Now we're gonna move on to planting. Planting roses, they really do need at least 6 hours of sun. If you can give them more sun, they like that even better, okay? If you have a spot that is just blazing all day sun, stick a rose there, okay? Well, with the caveat, they do like well-drained, decent soil that does have high organic matter, okay? There's not many roses really like heavy, icky clay. And when you go to plant it, you're basically going to plant it like almost any other shrub or perennial that you bring home, with one exception that we'll talk about. You're gonna take your pot, you'll dig your hole about twice as wide. You're gonna put in a good amount of nice organic matter, whatever you like to use, compost, bumper crop, that kind of thing. And personally, I love bumper crop that they sell here. I don't think I've planted a plant in my yard, whether it's an annual all the way to a tree, without bumper crop in almost 20 years. It's just kind of a nice, good mix of all kinds of different organic material. So basically, you're gonna wanna fill in a good amount of the compost, put your plant in. You're gonna plant it at soil level, like right where the soil level is, unless your plant is grafted. And so that's where the first part of knowing if your plant is grafted or not comes in. So if you take a grafted rose home and you're planting it, where I told you to look for that little grafted section, you're gonna wanna put that about 1 inch under the soil, okay? Now you will find a couple different schools of thought on that. You will find people who prefer not to do it, and this is one of those places where I say your mileage may vary, do what you're comfortable with. I have always planted mine 1 inch or so below the soil, and I've always had really good luck. And the line of thinking with that is basically where that's grafted, if you put it under, it's going to help protect from the elements. And that's where, that's what you want. You want that top part of the plant to be protected. So if you don't, I can give you an example. If you don't, say you plant a lovely white rose, you plant it, with the graft above ground. Next year comes around, and all of a sudden, you have one really long, wonky shoot with a bright red flower on it. and you think, I did not plant that, chances are the top of your plant has died and the understock has taken, the rootstock has taken over. That rootstock that we plant on or graft onto in this area is generally called Dr. Huey, and the flower of Dr. Huey is a bright red rose. It's not a bad rose, it's a pretty rose, but if you planted a white rose, that's not what you want. So there you go, that's an easy way to tell if your plant made it or not. Obviously then you finish planting, water it in well. At the time of planting, you can use a little bit of bone meal if you want, or root stimulator. I think I brought some here's the root stimulator. This is another thing that I really will not plant without in my yard. One little bottle will last you basically forever, and it really does help with transplant shock. Again, I use it with my annuals all the way up to trees. It really is it's a great product, okay? So water it in well, check the water a couple of times a week. I like to do that for the full first year, except when the ground is frozen, obviously. But make sure you do it at least that whole first season, okay? You're gonna wanna check it at least a couple times a week. Easiest way to check is just stick your finger down in the soil about an inch. If it's dry, an inch or so down, go ahead and water it. Generally, that's gonna be about twice a week, unless we're going through a hot or a dry spell. Then obviously you're gonna need to do it a little bit more, okay? And then when it comes to fertilizing, while getting established, you can either not fertilize it at all or use a really gentle fertilizer like fish emulsion, okay? I personally in my yard don't fertilize at all right after planting. If you think about it, if you've put all that organic matter in, it's gonna have a lot of nutrients from that. Container grown plants, when we planted these at our nursery, we incorporated a nice slow release fertilizer. If it's been sitting here, I guarantee you they've hit it with another fertilizer, so it has some built in. And also, while a plant is getting established, I kind of think of its job as kind of getting settled in and making itself at home. I don't want it to worry about being stressed about trying to push a whole bunch of new growth up top. So, plus it's one less thing that I have to remember to do, right? So that's my own personal feeling on fertilizing right at planting time. Roses do tend to be heavy feeders though. So once it is established, you are gonna wanna have a pretty regular fertilization schedule for the best blooms, which again, is probably why you're growing this plant, right? So if you choose to be a more hands-off gardener, which is perfectly fine, use whatever blooming plant fertilizer you like best. Whatever that is, as long as it's labeled for use with roses, okay? And follow the instructions on the package and go about your time. It'll be perfectly happy. If you want to be a little more hands-on, if you have, say, some of those hybrid teas, English roses, some of those that like a little more attention, you can take a few extra steps, okay? So you can start off in early to mid-spring, basically when the leaves are starting to emerge, and use a high nitrogen fertilizer at the very beginning, okay? That's gonna make for some nice, healthy green leaf growth. And you could also sprinkle a little bit of Epsom salts around. That'll help, again, make the green growth nice and lush, and also help with cane growth, okay? After that, once the shoots are about 4 to 5 inches long, you can add a slow release fertilizer. After that, throughout the season, every 2 to 4 weeks, you can fertilize with whatever you're using. Again, just follow the instructions on whatever you use. Fertilization is definitely not one of those situations where you think, oh, this much is good, that much must be, extra must be better. Truly follow the directions on whatever you're using, okay? And then you're gonna wanna stop fertilizing your roses. Actually, you're gonna wanna stop fertilizing all of your plants about 6 to 8 weeks before our first frost date, which around here is mid-October. So for the beginning to middle of August, stop fertilizing your plants, okay? You want it to start getting ready to go to sleep for the winter. You basically don't want it to try to keep pushing a whole bunch of that nice, tender new growth that the frost can come and then damage the whole plant overall. So that's a really good rule of thumb for all of your entire yard, okay? And again, please remember, some of those last parts, that was all a little bit extra. So if your eyes are glazed over at this point and you're thinking, I am never doing all of that, perfectly fine. Use a blooming fertilizer, stop beginning to mid-August, your plant will be fine, I promise, okay? Now, in pruning is another really important part to rose care, but again, it does not have to be difficult at all. The general rule is to prune in the springtime just as the bud is breaking. As a general overall rule, you're going to be cutting your plant back, except climbers, about half of the way, okay? What you're gonna wanna do is you're gonna wanna trim about 1/4 of an inch above an outside bud. Let me see if I can find one. So if I was going in and pruning, you see there's one that's going this way, and and then there's one kind of going this way. Whatever prune you're making, the bud that's right below it is gonna become your next dominant branch, okay? So your goal is not to create a whole bunch of really strong inward facing branches. That's why you wanna pay a little bit of attention and prune right above one that's going to go out and create a nice wider, bigger shape, okay? After you do that and you get it pruned all around, you really wanna take a look and see if there's any weak canes, anything that's diseased, anything that has died, and just get that out of there, okay? So doing all of this, that's what's gonna help you encourage new growth, better blooms, and those kinds of things, okay? One thing that is important with roses is to make sure your pruners are clean. You're gonna wanna make sure they're sanitized, because that is one of the best ways to help prevent diseases in roses. You can use whatever you like. You can use diluted bleach water, alcohol, those kinds of things. And there are a couple of additional things to take into consideration for a couple of the classes of roses that we'll go over. With climbers, what you're gonna wanna do first is take a look at any branch that's maybe rubbing up against the structure it's growing on. If there's a callus or you can see that it's gonna be a problem, go ahead and trim that out in early spring, get that out of there. You're gonna save yourself some headache, because if you're creating wounds, that's the easiest place for diseases to get into, and you do wanna get that out of there. So after that, you're gonna wanna kind of take a step back and take a look at the overall structure of your climbing rose. There are 2 types of canes that you wanna be aware of with your climbing rose. You've got your main canes and your lateral canes. Your main canes are pretty much what they sound like. Those are the thicker stems that make up the structure of your plant. You wanna aim to have 5 to 6 of these, okay? So as you're taking a step back, you're looking at it. If you have 8 or 9 of these main stems and you've got a couple that are maybe wonky, going the wrong way, not real balanced, go ahead and take those out now. Other than that, with those main canes, all you need to do is cut them back a little bit if they're not going where you want them, if they're getting too big, that kind of thing. The next thing you want to do with climbers is then go in to all those lateral or every one of those other shoots that are on the side and cut them back to about 3 nodes. So basically about 3 buds. So most of the time about this long. So that's going to encourage all those lovely later season blooms for you. And then after that, all you really have to do with those is just make sure that all of those main canes are secure and not kind of flopping. If you have any that are kind of, blowing away, just tie them loosely with twine. It's gonna be a lot easier for you to do it now than when it gets all full of leaves and blooms. And then when it comes to hybrid teas, with these, really the only main difference you need to think of is you kind of wanna keep in mind why you're growing the plant before you do the pruning. Now, with some of these others, you might be growing it for the shape, or that kind of thing, but with hybrid teas, it is for the flowers, right? So with these, it's a little more important. You want to take a little more time with these. What I do at home is the first thing I do is cut them back to about 12 to 14 inches. Then I really inspect every single cane to make sure to see what is healthy and what is not. If there is anything that looks diseased or pest-ridden, anything, I go ahead and get that out. I also cut out any inward-facing branches on these as well. And a thing to keep in mind is basically the more stems you have on these, the fewer or smaller flowers you're gonna get, because your plant is gonna be trying to put all of its energy into supporting all those extra branches. So you can be probably a lot more severe with the pruning of your hybrid teas than you think you can, especially if you want to focus on flowering. Now, I'm not suggesting you cut it down to 6 inches or anything like that. 12 to 14 inches is good. But when it comes to clearing out some of those extra branches, go ahead and get rid of them if you want, some bigger flowers. And try that and see how that works for you. And it is okay. These will look like a little more sparse than a lot of the other ones, and that's okay. That's just the nature of the beast, right? When it comes to shrubs, pruning shrub roses, there is absolutely nothing special about doing them. I do go in and clean out the diseased wood, but other than that, I honestly shape them like I do, or just prune them like the rest of my shrubs. As I'm actually surprised, I've got a group of 6 in the front. I think they're probably still mad at me. Last year I went out early in spring and I was pruning my boxwoods in kind of a meatball shape. I must have been in a pruning zone because I did the same thing to all my 6 roses. Roses are not supposed to be meatball shaped. Mine were. And they were fine. They were perfectly fine. So I guess the point of that story is they can take a lot and they even forgive you. So talking about winter care, again, shrub roses don't need any. Hybrid teas, many of the grandifloras, floribundas, and some of the climbers will. And again, this is where it comes back to being grafted or not, okay? Basically, freezing and drying are the 2 main problems on plants, on roses during the winter. So you are going to make sure that your rose has enough moisture going into the fall, okay? Once the ground is frozen, obviously you're done. But you don't want your plant to be dry, super dry, going into the winter. So then once we've had some frost and usually, a good freeze, and usually around Thanksgiving, that's when it's time to go out and do your winter protection if necessary, okay? And again, you can make it pretty darn easy. If you don't want to mess a whole lot with it, you can literally take a pile of mulch or some other loose, dry organic material like shredded leaves, straw, whatever you have around, and just mulch it 10 to 12 inches up the plant. Because that bottom 10 to 12 inches, that's what you're really concerned about, okay? So you can just mound it up. If you want to take it a step further or so, you can use something like a rose collar, which is basically just a 10 to 12 inch piece tall, very thin, pliable plastic that you can wrap around the base. They usually have clips that you can hook on the plant itself or into the ground. You can use that and fill with mulch. You can use chicken wire if you have that. I've actually even seen people use a few stakes around it and wrap some twine around it and use that to help. You can use anything or everything. And like you mentioned, rose cones, I'm sure I have some die-hard rose cone fans. If you are using a rose cone, just please do me at least one favor and make sure that you at the very least slice off the top of your rose cone, okay? If not, slice a whole rose cone in half, because you really want to make sure that your plant is getting some airflow. And what can happen in a rose cone, it's this lovely, nice, completely contained environment that is absolutely perfect for heating up on days like this, for collecting a whole bunch of moisture. And what loves that? Disease. So it makes it really easy for diseases to get in there for you and give you not such a great surprise in spring when you pull it off. To me, in my own yard, mound the mulch, that's about all I do. Okay, and then basically you're gonna wanna start removing your mulch usually late March, when we've had a few of the warmer days and when most of the chance of a killing freeze, which is about 24 degrees, has passed, okay? And then that's it, that's all you have to do. If we move on to diseases and pests, the easiest thing to do is to pick a disease-resistant variety. And I know that sounds simple, but there are so many that are out there, and most of the tags will tell you if it's a disease-resistant variety, or there are tons of lists online that are very, very easy to find. In a nutshell, almost all shrubs and ground cover types are already disease-resistant. If you want some of those other types, like I said, there's quite a few lists, but for example, on floribundas, hot cocoa, and campfire, which happen to be 2 of my favorites. Those are very disease resistant. And even when we get into the hybrid teas, ones like Beloved, Double Delight, Chicago Peace, those are all very disease resistant as well. The main diseases that you'll see on these, if you do have a problem, will be black spot or powdery mildew. Both of these can be helped by sanitation practices, okay? If you can water at the base of your plant rather than overhead over the top, that's gonna help a lot of, or any issue that you have with splashing. For example, if you've got some disease on your leaf and then you go water it over the top, it just splashes it all around. So watering it underneath the plant itself will help with that. Like we talked about sanitizing your pruners, that definitely helps. Making sure that you have enough sunlight and air circulation. And again, that's kind of where those pruning practices help. If you've kind of cleared out the center, so that sun and air can get to it, less chance it's going to be perfect for diseases. Let's see. If you do need to treat chemically, there are many options. Lots of different things you can use. I know there's a couple of options back there. If you want to use something like more organic that's got some neem oil, there's some neem oil in here. These are great as a preventative, and they also treat it once you do have symptoms. So these are really good options for you. And then also when it comes to pests, aphids and Japanese beetles are going to be the two main ones that you see. And again, this neem oil is going to be really good for those, or there are many other chemicals that you could do for that. And honestly, when it comes to Japanese beetles, the easiest way is really to get out there and hand pick. If you're not squeamish, of course. Really, we generally don't have enough plants nor a big enough infestation that there's so many that there's a problem. The easiest thing to do is go out in the morning when they're nice and sleepy still and sluggish and just flick them off your plant into a bucket of soapy water and your problem's gone. It'll take a couple of times, but that's all you need to do for those. And then as far as home remedies go, if you want to completely stay away from chemicals or you just want to try a fun science experiment at home, one of the easiest things to use actually for your roses are banana peels. Banana peels have a huge amount of macronutrients, especially potassium. They're great for overall health and bloom power. You can use them almost any way. You can do something as simple as chop them up into little pieces and put them in the soil. You can soak the banana peels in a jar of water for about a week and water with them. You can dehydrate them, grind them down to dust. You can throw them in the freezer and then blend them up with some warm water to make a lovely banana peel smoothie for your plants. You can really do almost anything. When it comes to another thing for disease-wise, you can try baking soda. You can actually dilute about a teaspoon of that in a quart of warm water with a tiny bit of Dawn or something and spray the leaves if you're having problems with something like black spot. So you can try that. If you're having a problem with slugs, all you need to do is crush up some eggshells and sprinkle it around the base. I actually use that one a lot for my vegetable plants. It really, honest to God, it will take care of the problem almost overnight. And then the last thing, if you are a complete goofball like myself and happen to have a worm bin at home or a worm farm, worm castings are pretty much the ideal superfood for almost all plants to work in for that. Well, thank you guys very much. That's really all I had, and thanks for spending your morning with me.